It is truly an honor to bring my next guest to Crowdsource the Truth viewers. I'm joined by Dr. Patrick Byrne. Dr. Byrne, welcome to the show.
Jason, it's an honor. Thank you for having me.
I have a strong feeling that this may be one of the most important interviews I've ever done, because there's so many aspects of your story that touch on things that we were exploring and discussing on Crowdsource the Truth before I ever heard of you. And I hope you won't take offense at this. I had never heard of you before you came to the public view with your story last year that you were telling on Fox News about the time you were approached by the Men in Black. And if I can kind of just lay that out for people who might have missed it or forgotten it, there's a bit of a history. You had a friend who was murdered, which was your first contact with federal investigations. And like anybody, you're going to help solve your friend's murder. And you are a fascinating and amazing guy in terms of the education that you've had. You hold a PhD, you've studied in China. You're obviously a technology expert in blockchain and the founding of Overstock.com. And you really are best known, perhaps, for the struggle against Wall Street, naked short selling, and your proposal to revolutionize Wall Street with blockchain technology. Is that all correct?
That's all correct. That's all correct.
Now, people are really looking at blockchain now, particularly with this announcement. I think it was yesterday that PayPal, one of the earliest players in online digital currency, is now getting involved in blockchain. But your interest is not so much in Bitcoin as it is in shoring up some of the really dangerous holes in Wall Street. Can you give us just a brief overview of that?
Sure. Do you remember Matt? You know who Matt Taibbi is, former Rolling
Yes.
Stone journalist? Remember about 10 years ago, he got famous with his article saying that what you needed to know about the financial system is it's like a great vampire squid wrapped around the face of humanity with a blood funnel stuffed in anything that smells like money. That famous line. Well, I found in 2005, I found the place where the biggest blood funnel is stuffed. Good. And it's technical. I don't want to go into it, but it's called the settlement system. It's the
Right.
bottom of Wall Street where the money and the stock changes hands. Turns out it doesn't work anywhere near like you think it works. And there's a bunch of grift in it and a bunch of ways to loot money out of it. There's now a $1 trillion lawsuit about this from some hedge funds because they figured out I was right. When everything crashed in '08, people forget this. It's been whitewashed out of history, but Greenspan went before Congress and he said this crash was caused, yes, it was the Bernie Madoff stuff, and yes, the mortgage-backed securities. But the third thing that everyone has forgotten underneath it is the settlement system. There's all this slop in the settlement system. That's exactly the thing I had figured out in '05. And I think, well, Greenspan thought it was one of the three causes of the '08 crash. It's the cause of this $1 trillion pension fund hedge lawsuit. Well, that crack could all be sealed. These grifts that are buried in the financial system that you don't know about, that people make fortunes out of, it turned out to be like 75% of the revenue of Goldman Sachs had to do with this little grift I had identified that you can take those grifts, that slippage out, Milton Friedman said there's no such thing as a free lunch. If people are making millions and billions out of the system that way and turning it into Maybachs and homes in the Hamptons and stuff, that doesn't come out of nowhere. That comes out of the capital and the savings of America. So it's this very complicated looting system. It can all be sealed up as we move to a blockchain monetary system, a blockchain version of Wall Street, because I'll get to the conclusion of it is what I discovered in the process is how corrupt Wall Street is. I'm sorry, how corrupt Washington is. Everything is corrupt. Everything's bought off. I learned this 15 years ago, but there's one thing that the Goldman Sachs of the world can't buy off, and that's the laws of mathematics. So the more we can move things to cryptography and to blockchain, which is protected by the laws of mathematics, rather than men in Congress who can be bought by K Street, the more we move there, the more we can sort of squeeze this grift out of society. So I'm a big blockchain proponent for all kinds of functions in society because you can't be cheated. The one thing that you can say about it is To cheat blockchain systems, you got to cheat the laws of mathematics. And Goldman can buy a lot of things, but Goldman can't buy its way to cheat mathematics.
I think it's also worth mentioning that your Overstock.com, which you were previously the CEO of and that you founded, was the first, is it the very first or the first major retailer to accept cryptocurrency?
It was the largest entity in the world accepting crypto in 2013 was a diner in Australia that was $800,000 a year. And people were thinking it would take a few years and then there'll be a $10 million company, and then a few more years, 100 million, a few more years, a billion. We were $1.3 billion and we stepped forward and started taking it. So I like to think we saved the Bitcoin revolution at least 5 years or something by jumping ahead like that.
Mm-hmm. And a lot of people have heard about Ross Ulrich, the Dread Pirate Roberts. There's a lot of negative publicity around Bitcoin having to do, and not to mention his life has been ruined. He's a young guy sitting in jail for life, nonviolent criminal, never touched any of the products that were sold on there. I've spoken to his mother about how federal agents became involved in that whole thing. I don't want to get too involved in that. People can look that up. And there are a number of really interesting videos, interviews with you and lectures that you've given about some of this blockchain technology and how it could shore up some of these cracks in the financial system. And we've learned in just the past few days, crack kills, Dr. Byrne. So we got to be real careful with that stuff. But the part I really want to get to is all this intrigue surrounding the third encounter that you had with individuals that you call men in black. And in a Fox News interview, you revealed that you had discovered one of the individuals who was sort of bringing these orders down from on high was the rogue FBI agent, Peter Strzok. Can we discuss this?
Sure. I never met Strzok or heard the name Strzok, but so the third time I agreed to help them. And I say men in black because I really don't want to disparage the FBI, because as you understand this, you're going to understand it, in a sense, it isn't the FBI. These places have been hijacked at the top. So I say men in black, by which I'll acknowledge I mean FBI, but other than that, I would say it. I did see Strzok, in 2015, in 2016, I got some requests from the men in black. They came back in my life, asked me some requests. I took part, good, loyal, stupid citizen, and they seemed a little fishy, but I didn't. And then a couple of years later, this whole Russiagate and it all starts spinning up. And I knew I had some important pieces, but I thought I had a couple minor pieces to a much different kind of scandal. I thought we were going to see an Anna Chapman-like event where the FBI swooped out and arrested 10 Russian spies all over the US. So I kept my pieces to myself, still thinking everything was kosher and everything was been. In the summer of 2018, I saw Peter Strzok go before Congress, and he was grilled by Congress. And there was some language he used. I don't want to mention it, but there were some words that were used that told me this is the guy who sent those orders. This is the guy who sent me those fishy orders back in 2015, 2016. At that point, I kind of checked out of the system as it stood and started coming in backdoor to Washington and trying to get the attention of some people. I knew I was going to sound lunatic, but getting some attention of people in a position in Congress, frankly, and started explaining to them what was really happening and what had really happened. And which is that everything you think you know, as I said last year, everything that the public's been told, it's all a lie. It's all a lie. I've been waiting. Let me be clear. I have no permission to come forward. And after I came forward a year ago, I got one message from the Department of Justice that said, you owe us 15 years for that. But we agree that the circumstances are extraordinary. So you just keep your mouth shut and wait and trust the process, and the process is going to do it. And after the election, you can come out and tell everything, but you keep your mouth shut till the election. And the message I sent back was, I'm comfortable with that as a solution as long as you come forward. I'm not ethically comfortable with any solution that does not include the public being informed of the truth before the election. And that's how things were left a year ago. I split the country and went to Indonesia. I didn't know what was going to happen. And that kind of got messaged between us. So I'm coming, however, on October 6th or so, they had They announced, well, they had Comey, no, they were going to have McCabe, I think, in front of Congress. McCabe backed out because of COVID. And the DOJ announced they're not doing anything until after the election. Durham's not doing anything. And I think that because of that, I'm going to earn myself the other 85 years I owe them by coming forward. But there's no way. It's not right. And I've sent them a polite, respectful message through the lawyers and such that said I'm not sure if it's right or wrong for you folks to be asking me to stay silent at this point, but I'm sure it's wrong for me to stay silent. So I'm going to come forward. I may owe them 100 years after I do this, but I have in the last week or two, I wrote up a 25-page description of what really happened. And now you're really the first interview I'm giving where I'm telling people everything that I left out when I came forward a year ago.
Wow. Well, thank you for doing that. And I've been reading all I can on your blog, your website here, Deep Capture. You've written quite a bit about your meeting with Maria Butina and the subsequent relationship that you had with her. She has now been released from prison and deported to Russia. There's so many details to this story. You even remark in the blog that much of it might not be digestible or even of interest to people who aren't scholars or lawyers. It's a very complex story. And again, I am trying to absorb all of it. There are so many different moving parts. I had originally become aware of you and your involvement in this when you made a bunch of appearances on Fox News, which frankly, I found them to be incredibly unprofessional, disparaging of you. There were, a lot of people who basically just said that you were a conspiracy theorist, and this is basically the standard fare for anybody who brings forward a story that they don't like. I've been finding so many confusing twists and turns. I've been paying quite a bit of attention to the Daily Beast lately. You run in circles, obviously, that most people will not as a technology giant and hugely successful guy. Have you ever met or encountered Barry Diller, the CEO of Interactive Corp that owns the Daily Beast?
Oh, 15 years ago, I had lots of conversations with him, with his people, and ended up having a private dinner and a private breakfast with him. Seemed like a fine gentleman. I doubt he has anything to do with what's going on here at the Daily Beast. I wasn't even aware the Daily Beast had written that.
Right.
But it doesn't matter. I came forward and then I jetted from the country because I knew there would be a bunch of that stuff saying I was crazy. What's odd about this, though, as far as conspiracy theories go, usually conspiracy theories is somebody who is saying, I have a theory that if you put the pieces together this different way, this is what really happened. In my case, I'm not saying that. I'm saying I'm a witness. I was a participant. I did it. I was the guy doing these things. So people might say I'm lying, but it doesn't really help to say it's just a theory. It's a wacko theory. You might say that if you think what I'm telling isn't the truth, then you have to think that I'm lying. It isn't just that I'm a theorist who got some pieces together. So maybe it's fine for the public to think I'm lying. I just want to point out that unlike all the other conspiracy theories in the world, I'm saying I was a participant. I built a $2 billion company. I've got a PhD from Stanford. I've got a pretty credible resume, and I'm coming out and saying I was part of this. And I'm putting all of that history and on the line, saying I was part of this all. And when I'm telling the country what really happened, it's the truth.
Right. And I think it's also important for people to remember that, so many people who are accused of telling these stories that are accused of being conspiracy theorists, the number one motive they say is, oh, this person's trying to write a book or make money. You obviously have, all the money or more money than anybody could ever want. Coming forward with a story like this has only hurt you. There's no financial motivation.
Cost me $100 million. It cost me $100 million to come forward and
Wow.
do this. But that's okay. I mean, I made a bunch of money too, but
Wow.
it's okay. That wasn't the analysis. The analysis was, to be honest, I'm ashamed it took me as long as last summer. I wish if I had to do it over again. Once I had seen Peter Strzok in July of 2018, and I realized what I had been part of. I should have gone public right then. Instead, I tried for almost a year to work within the system. First time in my life, I was not the hothead. I tried to work within the system, but finally I had enough last year, and I just came public with 15% of the story, and now I'm giving the other 85%. And I really admire how I was watching your interviews with someone else, and we were admiring how carefully you clearly do like some of the best research of anybody doing these kinds of interviews.
Well, thank you very much for saying that. And actually, I had kind of forgotten about your whole story because you, as you said, you went to Indonesia and you disappeared. And then a Crowdsource the Truth viewer emailed me this interview from the other day, which I found odd because I don't know who this Paula Schmidt is, but she was more of an interrupter than an interviewer. And you had a lot of things that you were trying to say that she kept cutting off at odd times. You also, I am very interested in subtleties and details, and I find you really fascinating for a number of different reasons because, I mean, you drop more Yiddish than my bubby, but don't take offense at this, you don't look Jewish to me.
No, but I know more about Judaism than any goy you ever met. I sort of grew up in a family that had a great admiration for everything. I'm an Irish Catholic, lapsed Catholic altar boy. I'm the Patrick Michael Xavier Byrne. But I grew up in a family with a lot of respect for education, and that means Judaism. And I ended up with really the great professors in my life. Almost all of the great professors in my life were Jewish. And then I went to work for, and so you just sort of, and then I went to work for Warren Buffett, and I was running a group of his apparel manufacturing. So I was the only goy in the Schmidt business in the US, and they took me under the wing and they taught me a lot. And then Overstock itself, the natural jobbing business is a bunch of, Jewish people out of Ohio is really where and they took me under the wing. So I've been kind of raised in business other than Buffett and my dad. Everyone who raised me in business, I think, was Jewish. So I've just had, I didn't realize I used that much Yiddish, but
No, it's okay. But also you've referred to Warren Buffett as your rabbi and people become confused by that. I detect that it's sort of a colloquial little joke between you and him. I don't think he's Jewish either, is he?
no, but it's a metaphor. And Buffett,
Yeah.
Buffett always speaks in metaphors. It's a lot easier if you can speak in metaphors with the people.
Yeah,
And so if you think of your relationship, are you Jewish, may I ask?
I am, yes.
So did you have a rabbi as a teen who was sort of, the relationship a teen might have with his rabbi?
Yep.
I met Buffett when I was a teenager. And ever since then, I've had that relationship with him that one would have with one's rabbi. He's sort of
Right.
my guidance I go to for big decisions in life.
And you grew up in Indiana, right?
I was born in Indiana. I'll give you
Fort
a quick,
Wayne.
I was Fort Wayne, Indiana. My father was an Air Force ROTC guy who had just got out of the Air Force, did a degree in math, was starting off in insurance. My first 16, 18 years, we basically lived the Horatio Alger dream. My family lived the Horatio Alger dream. So it's easy. And, I've had unbelievable tailwinds in life, kind of ridiculous, but it isn't so much. People sometimes write, well, I was born with a silver spoon in my mouth. I can see why they say that. It's actually a slightly more interesting or complicated story because it's more like we started off dirt poor. By the time I was in college, he was fabulously wealthy. When I was 13 or 14, this fellow from Omaha showed up in our life. No one had ever heard of him at the time, but he got interested in the company my father was working in. And he met me and my dad, and he started staying with us. And this was Warren Buffett. So I can actually look at but this was, like I say, before his name had ever been in the paper. But my parents used to let me skip school, which they never did. Only time I ever skipped school in my life was when he was around, and he would always book, and whenever he came to town, he would always set aside 2 or 3 hours. He said, tell Patrick I'm going to be free Thursday between 2 and 5. And I want him there. And I'd skip school. Sometimes he even took a train to New York, and I'd sit with him in a hotel. And I can look at the course of my life was really, a lot of it was driven by a dozen conversations I had with Warren Buffett through my teenage years.
Really amazing. The reason I was intrigued by this, the Fort Wayne aspect, I don't know if you're aware of another famous Fort Wayne resident or whatever, but George Swigert was the inventor of the cordless phone. And his family lived in Fort Wayne, Indiana. The reason I bring him up is not because the cordless phone is particularly interesting, but one of his sons, also named George Swigert, has done a lot of news reporting about you and Maria Butina and the whole thing surrounding, what's the guy's name who was her sponsor, Koshin or something like that?
Alexander Torsion.
Right. So George Webb
I did
did
not
a
know.
lot of, yeah. Well, this is where some of my knowledge, I think, might intersect with some of the factors of your story. And one of the reasons why, when you were first on Fox News, I tried to contact you. Obviously, very difficult to get in touch with busy people like you, and thank your staff for getting back in touch with me. But there's something going on with this story, Patrick, that causes me to think that you were the target of all of this, and that you have been entrapped by it.
I've always felt like the target of everything. It would make some sense if you can explain it.
Well, obviously, you've had a lot of interaction with the Securities and Exchange Commission, mostly in your efforts to bring Wall Street criminals to justice. You exposed all this illegal naked short selling. And, what I wanted to ask you about was this person, Melissa Hodgman. Are you familiar with her?
I am, but I only found out about this last March, in March 2019, which is one of the main reasons I realized it's time I wrap up I got to get out of a publicly traded company. I can't, I clearly have some kind of a bullseye on me and I got to get out. It was when I found out this fact is when I started making preparations to get out of Overstock sooner rather than later.
And for people who don't know, this woman is married to Peter Strzok.
Correct.
Despite the fact
I found out that the investigation launched on me, another investigation number 7 was launched on me by the SEC. I've had 3 so just so people know, normally if a CEO or a CFO ever has a restatement, if you ever have to come out and say, well, I restated financials, I reported to the public in the past, that's a huge scandal and you don't survive it. No one's ever had 2, no one's ever had 3. The SEC has done 6 investigations on me and my company when I was there. 3 of them, I mean, they spend a year, 2 years, millions of dollars, and they go nowhere. And they had to give us a letter that said, we found nothing. And the SEC hates doing that. 3 times, they did force a restatement. And the restatements were on the order of, collectively, I think they came to 4/100ths of 1 penny of 1% of our revenue over the time. There's never been, the SEC's never done this, but they made, and it was actually in the direction of we were a little bit too conservative by 4/100ths of 1%. So the SEC clearly had a bullseye on me. I didn't know, but what I found out last March when they started a new investigation for stuff they have, which has since all gone through and all turned out to be totally kosher. And there was a civil action lawsuit that got kicked out of the federal court a couple of weeks ago on the same set of facts. They started that, and 4 months into it, so last March, I found out that the unit at the SEC that started it is run by Peter Strzok's wife, and that's when I realized my different lives had intersected, and I owed it to the shareholders. I probably had to get away from the company. So, right. So there you go. Yeah.
Well, and that was a fascinating aspect to me. Obviously, your performance as CEO, I mean, it's just very responsible. What I had observed, I mean, this is the first time you and I have ever spoken right here today, but just from watching you on Fox News and sort of thinking about some of these facts that we're discussing, why would this super rich guy come out with a story that's obviously going to hurt his reputation, could hurt his company? It had to be true, I felt. And earlier in our conversation, you said something to the effect of it's either a conspiracy theory or it's true or you're lying. I think there's another possibility. It's true as far as you understand it, but the whole construct around you has been false. So your understanding of the true events that happened to you do not reflect what's actually going on. And we're tapping on it right now. Sorry?
And I knew one of the things that happened is I realized I was being played. It took me a while I didn't know how to put the pieces together, but I knew that the reality they were constructing for me was false.
Yes, and that's part of the reason why I think this guy, George Webb, is fairly important to your story, because what I observe is that there is an effort to kind of plant these stories And just like you would plant a seed, they water them and they allow them to grow. Now, on your own blog, Deep Capture, which is very well written and very informative for people who want to learn more about this, obviously you write like a novelist, and at the risk of getting too personal, my own insights tell me that you were really in love with this woman.
Well, love is a very big word. Yeah, you could say, of course, I loved her, and I was quite fond of her. That has nothing to do with any of this story, what's driving me and such. Even as it was going on, that was an incidental fact. I mean, it didn't drive anything I did. I did the things I did, but yeah, I was certainly definitely very fond of her. I think the world of her. It never occurred to me that we should end up together. This girl belongs back in Russia, and she used to want to be the president of Russia. She's the most impressive Russian I ever met. And something that was kind of lost in the press here was she was chosen and sent to do this by General Kalishnikov. 93-year-old General Kalishnikov picked this 24-year-old girl for this mission, and this has been confirmed, to start this gun rights group. But what the gun rights group was really is to be a safe space for liberals, and with the idea of reaching out to America and being some kind of bridge for peace. That was General Kalishnikov, and he chose this girl. She's an extraordinary young woman. So yeah, I had deep affection for her, but I've had affection for other people before that's one compartment, but I had a set of duties, and the set of duties I feel is what drove my decision making.
And I didn't mean to imply that, anything other than she does seem like quite an exceptional young woman. You go into some detail about how she was selected at the age of 6 to go into a very special academy in Russia where she was educated. You had some question as to whether people were selected for their mental capabilities or their physical capabilities. And again, another one of the things that really rang true to me, I was previously married to a Ukrainian woman, and under the USSR, obviously, it was the same government controlling it all. She's told me that at the age of 6, she was selected out of kindergarten. The communists, as she said, came in and measured the children and gave them various tests. My ex-wife was selected to go into a sport acrobatic training program and later became a world champion acrobat. She's performed all over the world. So this seems to be something that is done or was done. And you said this is like the last 2 remaining from the old Soviet days.
Right. There were 2. It was academic. It was supposed to be academic. My guess is it probably was some kind of recruitment ground for their security services. There were 2 schools, one for the greater Moscow area and one for all the rest of Russia. You're chosen, I think she told me, for both academic and physical performance, but age 6. And she went to one of those 2 and graduated number 2 in her class. She's a physical phenomenon. She was also the greater Moscow amateur powerlifting champion. She gets out of prison and she's like skinny like a rail, but she's quite a physical person, but really she's very, very smart, really, really exceptionally smart.
Yeah.
I gave some proof of that. I think in a footnote, I described the lumosity stuff we used to do. Did you get that far?
I'm not sure. I was trying to find where the footnotes were. There are quite a few footnotes, but when I clicked on them, they didn't link. So I will go back and look at them all. But it was clear to me that she must be exceptional because you are a highly intelligent guy, PhD. You've studied in China. You've been all around the world. You're a wealthy businessman. They obviously can't send some floozy to try to entrap you. They need a sophisticated woman who's going to have some really unique characteristics to even hold your interest beyond a few minutes. And I'm not impugning her, but what I detect here is an operation that mirrors certain other things that I've seen that some of these same players have swirled all around. Roger Stone had some sort of a meeting with you where he tried to say that you had invited him to some event at a building or an office that you owned. And in fact, he was invited by a third party that you just allowed to use the space, and he wanted to get you to run for president. Now I saw Roger Stone the other day saying that he's angry at you for something. It's a lot of convoluted stuff with Roger Stone.
I didn't know he was angry. The last I heard, he was good. There was some crosstalk. It really, that little thing about the invitation is just we had in a building in Utah, we built as our headquarters. We had a beautiful meeting space. The Libertarian Party of Utah asked to use it. I said, fine, go ahead and use it for some evening they wanted, some conference they wanted. They invited Roger Stone out to Utah. Roger Stone came to Utah, but sent word he wanted to take me to dinner. I frankly hate to be ignorant. I didn't really know who Roger Stone was. I watched that. It was just around the time that documentary came out. I watched it. I went to dinner. He asked me if I would consider going into politics, and I thought about it and told him no. But it was all quite innocent. I think that later, that's right, sometime maybe this summer, he came out and said he now feels that I had invited him out to pump him for information about Russia or something. And it really is kind of just it's a total coincidence. Someone else invited him. He asked me to dinner. And I was trying to keep my own counsel with about Russia in general, because I had been involved in some of this stuff. But when I was over dinner, he started talking about Russia, and I did pump him for information, trying to find out what he knew, because I was trying to figure out how did you take these different pieces I knew and match it into what the bigger picture is. But no, I never reported on him and had nothing. He invited me to dinner, and there was just some minor confusions like that. But no, there was nothing sinister in any of that. And he never said anything other than at dinner, what he told me is, look, I'm telling the truth. The feds think that the charge against him was so arcane, it's hard for me to even recreate it. But I know he got like 9 years for it, or 6 years. And, I look at Hillary and these other people who do stuff that is not even in the same stadium. It's far worse. And they can't get a traffic ticket. But anyway, Roger, I'm sorry to hear he's angry at me. Whatever it was, truly was not any kind of setup or anything. And so that's that.
Yeah. Well, and there's a lot of things. I know we have to say they're coincidences, but sometimes I feel like maybe they're not coincidences. In the blog, you say that the either Netflix or YouTube was recommending this Roger Stone documentary, Get Me Roger Stone, and then a close friend of yours only a few days later said, hey, have you seen this documentary about Roger Stone? Now, of course, it's being promoted, so anybody looking at Netflix at that time would see it. It's not that outrageous, but it is also conceivable. I mean, Netflix knows that it's Patrick Byrne who's logged in there, and they could certainly send something to you, or we know the NSA and all these agencies are into everybody's everything. You're kind of at this level of like a Joe Nacho where, I mean, look, people look at you and they say, oh, the guy gets jammed up legally. He's got $100 million to fight it. But it doesn't matter. Joe Nacho was a billionaire, and they stuck him in jail for years. They have ways of putting the hammer down on whoever they want, don't they?
Well, they do. They do. I like to think that I might be a special case. It might be a little bit harder or more problematic for various reasons with me. I'm not afraid of them. It could, but there's a writer named Thomas Pynchon, and in Pynchon's novels, that's basically what there are. There are always stories of protagonists caught in these immense webs, and you read for hundreds of pages trying to figure out what's the coincidence and what's meaningful, and it all just sort of disappears. And so you could be right. That could all have been driven. I think that it could have been that even back then I was just being manipulated, but it could be that it was just, you would think someone like Roger and I might cross paths eventually. I don't know, but I clearly was manipulated through some of this. It's just hard for me to pick out where the manipulation started and where it was natural.
Right, because what you were able to kind of surmise once you realized that this was Peter Strzok being involved and they had asked you back for a third time, this is all stuff that you've said on TV or on your blog, that they wanted you to participate in a sting to entrap Hillary Clinton in a bribery. And the premise that was given to you, or that you were able to discern, is that the idea was that Barack Obama would have, compromat, as it's called, bribery type blackmail material on Hillary Clinton so that he could kind of control her presidency. The thought was that she'd be elected in 2016 and Barack Obama would have this lever where after she left, then Michelle would go in there. This this seems a little weird to me because Hillary Clinton has done so much illegal stuff through the Clinton Foundation and records that are in the public domain. Any president with a legitimate Department of Justice behind him who wanted to prosecute her or reveal some information that would be damaging wouldn't need this whole scheme. It seemed more to me, because you also mentioned, this was what I wanted to ask you. You mentioned that they had offered you some kind of a letter that was like a get out of jail free card. Like, this is otherwise illegal, but because you're down with the FBI, you have this letter. And most people have never heard of that. It's not really like officially recorded anywhere. It sounds to me like a letter that when you present it to a federal judge, they'll tear it up and say, this is nonsense, you're going to jail. A way for the FBI to trap you.
Well, could be, except federal judge doesn't get to. He's got to go through. There's still a right to a jury trial, and no, I don't think they'll find 12 Americans who'll convict me of spitting on the sidewalk if they ever show them that letter. But the letter, I'm afraid you're conflating a few different stories. Can I unscramble what you just said? So there's the period I really dated Maria 2 different periods. There's the first period I dated Maria, came across her in July 2015 to March 2016. Now in the press, she was dating some Republican big shot. We were having an affair on the side, and not often, but every 2 months, 3 months, she'd slip out. We'd spend a weekend, which kind of worked out nicely. So in the middle or towards the end of that, they came to me and said, we need you to work on something more important. The Bureau is setting Hillary Clinton up in a sting, and we want you to arrange a bribe for her. Now, the FBI, who did that, this is where you're getting things confused. They knew nothing about this magic letter. 10 years earlier, in 2006, the Senate Judiciary Committee, because I'd been very active with them trying to unscramble what was going on Wall Street and bring all kind of whistleblowers and stuff. Well, let's call that the flashback. We'll get to the flashback, but that's a flashback. Don't confuse it with what I was doing for the FBI. So they came to me in the first period of that seeing Maria, which was done. They didn't direct me to, they didn't direct me not to. I would say they directed me to, it was okay with them if I got to know her better. And then as I got to know her better, when I got to see her for the second time, she is actually the one who's made clear she wanted it to be romantic. So, no,
hard to say no.
Yeah, I'm accommodating. She's a wonderful gal. So, and I was trying to be productive. She wanted to be a back channel for peace, and I was trying to open doors for her, and that just happened. So, in the middle of that period, though, the Men in Black came to me. So, call this about a year before the election. The year before the election of 2016, they asked me if I would set Hillary Clinton up for a bribe. Shall I tell you this story? Shall I walk through it?
Well, I think people can hear that on previous interviews, and I apologize for conflating things, but I think that the opinion that I had of that letter is still valid. It sounds like a way that the FBI could trick somebody like you into doing something illegal. I mean, look at what happened to Michael Flynn. We don't think that the federal court would act in the way that it is, but like I said, when they want to jam somebody up, they seem to have magical ways of doing it, and this guy Peter Strzok and his wife could be working kind of both sides against the middle. I mean, let me back up a second.
The FBI didn't know about the letter. The FBI didn't know about the letter. The letter came in 2006 from the chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee, who asked me to investigate the FBI.
Was that our inspector?
That was our own inspector.
Right.
He asked me to investigate the FBI and across the federal government. He gave me very clear direction about what he wanted me to do. I'm not really going to explain that.
Sure.
But the Senate Judiciary Committee, which is the ultimate bulwark against corruption in America, and there's a reason for all that, but its authority to investigate corruption trumps the authority of anyone else in America, any other government official, because they can look into anything under the grounds of corruption. And that means anything touched by a criminal or civil penalty, which anything you can think of. I can spill a glass of water in a restaurant, and there's probably a civil penalty. So they can look into anything in America they want in the grounds of looking into corruption. And they called me in 2006 and told me that I was going to investigate Washington, D.C. for them. and that they couldn't, that there was something, and these were their words. They said there's some sort of systemic corruption taking over our national government. We can't even tell you what it is, Patrick. It's like it's a foreign government, but it isn't a foreign government. But what we have learned is we can't fight it from within the government. And we get you. We get that you're eccentric. We get that you're a horse of a different color. But we love you. You're a fighter. We love you. And we're going to ask you to investigate the federal government. And this is how you're going to do it. And then they laid out a very clear path I was going to take. So that's the and they told me, somebody let me know, this had been done in World War II. In World War II, there was a concern of Nazi sympathizers, German sympathizers in the federal government. And an American businessman, I think they said he was from Wall Street, was given a letter and told to interact with the federal government and try to find the German sympathizers. There's really only one way you can do that, and that's to become a German sympathizer, right? And so you don't want to get hung as a traitor 5 years later by some other administration that gave him a letter saying he was going to do this. Well, such a letter was drafted and shown to me and signed by the chairman. It may have been signed by about 9 senators, but it was at least signed by the chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee, and it was tucked away. And so the FBI didn't know anything about that. The government did not know anything about that. So I had all these opportunities to interact with the government, and I helped them on Wall Street. I helped them chase Wall Street, and I got to, but I was at one time both trying to help them, but also trying to find what I'd been asked to find. And so when they came to me and they asked me to set up Hillary Clinton for a bribe, which I did, and just so you know, it's all written out on Deep Capture, they told me about one bribe she took. They told me who it was from, how much it was, how it was done. It was a foreign government. They asked me to set up, yes, it's and they asked me to set up a second bribe, and that would be done under their observation and control. And they knew of a government that they believed wanted to pay a bribe, and my assignment was to befriend that government and to find and befriend its bagman, and then to get that bagman 10 minutes alone in a room with Hillary Clinton. So I had to work both sides of that equation, and I had 2 months to do it. But within 2 months, there had to be a room that Hillary walked into and the bagman walked into, and they spend 10 minutes alone. You take it from there, Byrne. So it's up to me to figure out how to befriend the foreign government, find the bagman, and do all this. And I did it, and it was successful up to 13 hours before the event. And then the curtain comes down for me. But as of 13 hours before the moment that was going to happen, 2 months, 6 weeks later, everything was on track. All the pieces had been manipulated into place that needed to be in place. The curtain came down for me. I wasn't in the room when it happened. So I can't say for sure that it happened, although I do happen to know now that it did. But that came later. I didn't know if it happened or not, but everything looked on track. 3 days later, the men in black show up again in my life. And this is where they told me, am I going on too long, or did you?
No, not at all. I want to hear what you have to say.
This is what they told me. So I walked to that meeting with the men in black thinking we're going to crack champagne. What's going to happen? I was all excited. And the men in black showed up and said, we need you to, they never told me, did she show up or not, 13 hours after the curtain came down for me. But they said, we need you to forget everything that just happened. And we mean it, Patrick. We mean every second. You got to wipe from your memory, you can't remember a thing of this. Neuralizer. I said, why is that? I don't get it. And they told me this story. It sounded like cock and bull. Shall I tell it to you, or is it
Please.
Well, they said, listen, it's been decided that Hillary, this is almost a year before the election. They said it's become clear Hillary's going to win, and nothing can stop that now. So we know that the first thing that she's going to do as president is she's going to send her people over to the FBI. They're going to ask who was part of investigating Hillary. Anyone who was in on this is going to be destroyed. That includes you, Patrick Byrne. So this has been scrubbed from the highest level, this entire operation. So I said, yes, sir. And I went home. And I thought about it for a couple of weeks, and there were some things in that that did not add up. A number of things. If they were going to that analysis, they would have done that before they had me do what I had done. Secondly, men in black aren't afraid of anything. They're not the kind of guys who would be scared. It didn't seem right for so many reasons. And third, I was thinking, geez, don't they realize if she gets elected president, then we're going to have the 1990s all over again, where there's a perpetual investigation. Why don't you do this in a week? You could have me and a couple other people in front of a grand jury, get this out. She gets indicted, and the Democrats could elect a clean president. I asked to meet them again, which is very odd. You don't ask to meet them. They show up when they want to talk to you. But I had a way of asking to meet them, and we met again, and I let them know those doubts and saying, I don't mean to be difficult, but this just doesn't make sense to me. And there were three of them, and that's when they revealed the truth to me. And when I say this, your viewers will understand. This is the key that I didn't say last year, but when you hear this, you will understand what happened the last 4 years in America. What was finally said to me was, Patrick, look, what's really going on is this word for word. What's really going on is this. At this point, so this is now early 2016, Q1 2016. They said, at this point, Barack Obama, now I've been droning on, but if you folks pay attention for 30 seconds, you'll get everything that happened in the last 4 years will click into place. They said, Patrick, what's really going on is this. President Obama has his people at this point across the federal bureaucracy, but especially the Department of Justice. Hillary is going to be president for 8 years. Nothing's going to change that. But while she's president, think of there being a Bunsen burner in the Department of Justice, like high school chemistry. Remember your Bunsen burner?
Yep.
And that information about the two bribes is going to be sitting on top of that Bunsen burner. And the hand on the Bunsen burner is going to be the hand of one of Barack Obama's people. If Hillary's a good girl, defends Obamacare and such, the flame stays low. If she's a bad girl and starts thinking for herself, the flame gets turned up high. And that way, Barack Obama is going to manage Hillary Clinton for 8 years. And then she's going to step down and Michelle's going to run. And Patrick, that's the plan.
See, and I believe that was the plan. And I believe that that's what they told you. I frankly find everything that you've said entirely credible in the context of what you understand to be true. But I still believe that you've been fundamentally misled by the government, maybe even by Arlen Specter. I don't want to throw gasoline on the fire of people who want to call you a conspiracy theorist. They call me that all the time. Arlen Specter, of course, was involved, for people who don't remember, in the Warren Commission. And for people who have looked at evidence surrounding the JFK assassination, many believe that Lee Harvey Oswald was not the assassin. And some of those people might feel that Arlen Specter secured his place in the government, in the Senate, by carrying out this role and covering up this assassination. Certainly, we've learned in the past week that the lengths to which the government, the press, some of these big corporations will go to cover stories that they don't like are...
Isn't it crazy?
It's
the Biden stuff, how they're just refusing. I just saw NPR has come out and said, we are not going to waste people's time covering stories that aren't important or something like this. It's like, I wonder if they would think it was unimportant if it turned out, Trump had done this.
You said a lot of things in our interview here, Patrick, that I think are very important. And
I'll tell you one that no one has. Tell you one that no one has. See, maybe Arlen Specter 55 years ago was involved in the Warren Commission and stuff. I don't think you need. Arlen Specter did this 14 years ago with 9 other senators from both sides of the aisle, asked me to investigate the federal government. I think because they wanted me to find exactly what I found. I can even tell you that the operation that I described turns out to have had a name. And you're going to hear that name, Operation such and such. And it turns out to have been Brennan's name for this operation to trap Hillary. Think of it, imagine it was called Operation Flytrap. Now,
I thought Candy Cane. It was Candy Cane in the last interview. I'm kidding.
Yeah. Was it Brendan's Candy Cane? There was an Operation Candy Cane that was the mission by Brennan and Obama to trap Hillary and so they had this lever on her. So that's what I don't think we have to go back to Arlen Specter 14 years ago. I don't think he had anything. He died 10 years ago. I don't think he had anything to do other than he and 9 other senators were honest guys who said something's gone wrong with the federal government. We need you basically to penetrate it and find the deep state.
See, and you just said the word deep state. This is one of the words that they've used to malign you in articles that claim that you're wearing a tinfoil hat and all this kind of thing. I agree with you that they don't like the word deep state. I agree with you. I mean,
anyone who doesn't get that there's a deep state, I didn't know that was even
Rachel Maddow doesn't believe there's a deep state. Jake Tapper doesn't believe there's a deep state. The Daily Beast doesn't believe there's a deep state. And they use it to disparage you. But the deep state, as I understand it, just describes this perpetual bureaucracy that goes beyond the United States government. It's government bureaucrats who remain, like you look at somebody like Dr. Fauci. He's been there for 47 years, I think, or 37 years. Joe Biden has been around for 47 years. This is the deep state. You know, we've got term limits on presidents and other offices, but those guys stick around. And, you know, there was something else. There were many things in this interview that I found quite interesting. But at the outset, I'm not going to ask you about this woman, Paula, or what her story is, but you mentioned Iran-Contra at the very beginning of this.
Paula Schmidt is a journalist, a well-known Brazilian journalist who I knew 15 years ago. I came across in the Middle East, and I've never seen her outside the Middle East. I don't think I've even seen her in 15 years or 10 years until she interviewed me the other day. But she's a well-known Brazilian investigative journalist.
Not disparaging her, but you brought up Iran-Contra, and she immediately said, oh, well, I think that it's a limited hangout, and she was searching for the word controlled opposition. But I think that Iran-Contra remains one of the most troubling scandals in the history of our country. And people who watch Crowdsource the Truth are aware that one of the components of Iran-Contra was this trading of arms for money, the CIA under George H.W. Bush, trading arms for money to Iran for their ongoing war with Iraq, and then taking that money to the Contras in Nicaragua who were fighting the Sandinistas. You touched on this, fighting communism in South America. But the aspect that a lot of people don't know about is what Gary Webb had reported on, the cocaine coming out of Nicaragua into the United States through Mena Airport, where Bill Clinton.
Yep, Arkansas, Berry Seal. That's very well. There was a Tom Cruise movie about that stuff, but they really cut out the Arkansas Mena connection. And they didn't play that up. But yeah, there were flights. The flights were coming back from Central America and Panama and Nicaragua and such up through and landing in Arkansas and dropping off in the 80s. And I knew that in the 80s. It's kind of funny. I'm a pilot. I was taught to fly in the mid 80s by a Special Forces colonel. And in the talk, just in the talk of being around each other for months, he knew about this. And he was telling me about this like in 1984 that was going on, so it sounds like a conspiracy theory, but I saw 5 years later, it started actually breaking into the press. There was a fellow at the San Jose Mercury News who ended up doing in the late
Gary Webb.
That was Gary Webb, the guy from the San Jose Mercury News?
Yes, not George Webb, not George Webb. That's a different guy. So this is the next thing I want to come to, because you were interacting with Maria Butina. Now we hear that the wife of the mayor of Moscow is Maria Buturina. Is that right?
Yeah, no relation.
Of course. But the name sounds remarkably similar. And there's this thing that I call them social engineers. They love to do this identity duplexing and conflating stories and names and people. Now, I was confused earlier today thinking that you might be a writer for the Daily Beast, but it's actually this guy, Brian Patrick Byrne. He loves to write about how great Hillary Clinton is and how Trump supporters are terrible and doing all kinds of things. I don't expect that you even know about this, but it's just a weird coincidence. And I just think, Patrick, that you've been a target because of the work that you've done to shore up how many criminals must launder money and finance operations through these cracks in the Wall Street system, that your work in blockchain and some of your endeavors, I don't know if T0 is exactly part of this, but you're involved in a lot of blockchain efforts
Zero
that
is the
could put...
blockchain Wall Street. It's the blockchain version of Wall Street that I started.
I think this is why they hate you, Patrick.
There could be a lot of reasons. Yeah.
You are the most hated man on Wall Street, according to you. You might also be the most hated man in the deep state. And you may not know that, but I think all of these events, Maria Butina, and again, I don't know her, I'm not making a judgment about her. And when I said earlier that I felt that there was real affection that you had for her, the only thing I meant by that is the thing that I've observed that these social engineers are very adept at. They know that you're not a guy that they can offer $5,000 or even $5 million to do something illegal or immoral, because you've got a ton of money, you've got a strong moral compass. They need a way to deceive you into doing something that you believe is the right thing to do for the right reasons. And this convoluted story that they gave you seems like that to me. The other thing that happened in that interview with the Brazilian journalist was you had mentioned this story that had just come out and received a lot of attention on something called Pure Social TV. They left out the word engineering, but this is this story having to do with the parrot man in the falcon pajamas, this guy who claims to be the Benghazi whistleblower, who was sharing a lot of information that may in fact be true, but this is an interesting story as well, because a guy that I do a regular show with, who is the editor of True Pundit, he published a book about exactly this story in 2018, and he'd been studying it for like 10 years or something. And the day that that video came out, Mike Moore and I did a video basically revealing the holes in the story, mostly of the people surrounding Alan Perot who were bringing his story forward. Like you, I think he was a target in this story, as were the Gold Star families. But normally what we do is we have sponsor exclusive shows on Patreon and Subscribestar. That's how I fund Crowdsource the Truth. And we use Vimeo to provide those videos because it has much more advanced security than YouTube. And strange to observe, this video was totally deleted, and the Crowdsource the Truth Vimeo account was entirely decimated in less than 12 hours after publishing this video. And Vimeo is also owned by Barry Diller's Interactive Corp. The deletion of Crowdsource the Truth was virtually, coincident with them publishing stories about how Trump is a conspiracy theorist for retweeting stories about this admittedly bizarre-looking fellow with the turban, the falcon, the pajamas. It's, again, another play to make him seem ridiculous, which causes me to believe that his information might be true. But just like you, they want to crap up this story so that anybody hearing you say anything says, well, this guy's absolutely crazy.
Well, let them. It's nice when reality is on my side. They can. At this point, they're trying. It's been kind of odd that I came up on October 6th or 10th or so, and I wrote that full 25-page story. What happened? I've been on TV hundreds of times in my life. I've had since a year ago, since I came public with a piece of the story, I've had every news organization in the world trying to interview me, from BBC and Russian TV to Australia to everything across America. I came out and told that truth and that story and said, I'm ready to go on television. No one
Right.
at Fox, no one will interview me since I put that story up. And I've had for a year, they're knocking on the door. When will you come on? When will you come on? They read that story and they just went completely, they will not have me on.
Sounds a lot like what happened with the New York Post on Twitter, doesn't it?
Isn't that odd? Can you believe this is America, Jason, that we're having even these discussions, and public radio is saying, we don't cover a story you should look up the statement that someone put out on NPR about why they're not covering Biden. It's so Orwellian. All of these people have shredded their credibility in my view.
Well, Dr. Byrne, I can believe that it's America because, like so many people in my life, including my own father, who is a highly intellectual guy, most of these people for my entire life have thought that I was crazy, but yet they're calling me now and they're saying, hey, wait a minute. What is this about Arlen Specter and the Warren Commission? So I'm so glad that we were able to have this conversation. I know you're extremely busy and our hour has expired, but I
No, it's
hope we'll
okay.
have.
Oh, yeah, sure.
Oh, well, great.
If you want to stay another few minutes, we can.
Absolutely. I mean, I hope we'll have an opportunity to explore some of this in future interviews as well. Anything that I can do to help you bring the story forward, I want to do because I am firmly convinced that the deep state permeates Wall Street, the SEC, the FBI, the Senate, all of these different positions, and including, corporate America, and all the people that we're talking about, I believe, stand to lose a lot if the crimes of Hillary Clinton are exposed. And the only part of the story about this compromising material being held over a Bunsen burner that doesn't fit with the rest of it for me is that they did not need to entrap Hillary Clinton in bribes. She's taken money and done illegal things with countries all over the place. It just reeks of an operation to entrap you.
Could have been. Interesting thought. Hadn't thought of that. You clearly have a sly and devious mind that you're putting to good use. You're sublimating to good use.
And this is the very purpose of Crowdsource the Truth, because your education, your experience, your knowledge of blockchain and mathematics and philosophy and your work with Milton Friedman and Warren Buffett, I mean, I've got nothing like that type of experience. But yet, the purpose here is to take each of our individual knowledge and create sort of a virtual Venn diagram in the hope that one little thing that I know could be like a puzzle piece slotting into this giant puzzle that you've been brooding over for years here. And if anything I could say or do will help you figure this out, I want these people to be brought to justice as well. What do you think about Peter Strzok now? He's publishing books. He's walking around. He's not going to go to jail, is he?
Yeah, I think he is, unless he's singing. I think that Comey, I think that Strzok, McCabe, Comey, Brennan, and Hillary are all looking at the possibility of jail. And I think some of them are singing on others, or I think that they may be holding one face to the public while behind the scenes people are actually singing and making deals. Who knows? Hillary's been kind of strangely silent the last couple of months, don't you think?
I do think.
But I think Strzok's going to go. You probably don't want to go into it, but once I figured out what I'd been in the middle of, as you know, I kind of manufactured a charge and sent it up the chain. I understand that was quite it's so inflammatory you probably don't even want to cover it, which is fine.
No, you say whatever you want to say. Inflammatory doesn't scare me.
It's in the online, so I'll
we'll refer people to that.
It's online. Just go and read online. It's a little bit salacious. We'll let you go read it online. But I tried to set up my chain of command. People should know that they came back and they asked me to re-engage with Maria and restart a romance. And I agreed, which is illegal, incidentally, and they never do that. And I want to be clear, the men in black were very honorable, and they hated this. But they said that you're being asked to rekindle your romance with Maria and get to the bottom of her in Russia and all this stuff. And I did as they asked in the sense of I re-engaged and I created the appearance of a romantic relationship, but I actually never touched her after that. I did not in the whole period that followed, just because I wanted to maintain a clear record. And I created some kind of quite shocking criminal charges on my chain of command and you can go online and read how I did that. And I'm told that those charges are floating around and they are using somebody up above me signed off on some very bad stuff. Now, the very bad stuff never happened, but they thought it happened and they signed off on it. And that was just because I was doing what I was supposed to. I basically sent a very bad criminal charge into the deep state, and someone in the deep state signed off on it and made it all go away. And one of the investigations is who signed off on that and who made it go away. I think I really set up the deep state, frankly, for a set of bad criminal charges. So thank you, Jason. Thank you for having me on. Anyone who wants to read about that can go to Deep Capture and read the article at the top. And And thank you for being the first to have me on and tell the story.
Well, thank you for joining me, Patrick. Dr. Byrne, it's been an honor and a pleasure, and I hope we'll have an opportunity to speak again in the future. People can read all about your story on Deep Capture, and have an excellent day. I know you're very busy. I appreciate the time. Thanks for sharing this with us.
Thank you so much, sir. It was great to be on.
Thank you. And thanks to everybody who's been watching. That's an absolutely amazing interview. I have so many more questions for Patrick Byrne. I just have been absorbing this story for the past few days when he did that interview with Paula Schmidt. And it was just amazing to me how George Webb was so dialed into all this from the beginning. All of these bizarre social engineering things that seem to be accelerated by the Daily Beast, coincident with my Vimeo channel being smashed. It all seems mighty coincidental. Fantastic conversation with Dr. Patrick Byrne. I hope that people will become sponsors of Crowdsource the Truth by going to subscribestar.com/crowdsourcethetruth or patreon.com/crowdsourcethetruth. I can't bring you amazing interviews like this one with Patrick Byrne without your support and sponsorship. So please join us today, and I'll see everybody soon. Thanks for watching.